Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at the stories being followed in the current edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined today by Thad Greenson, news editor, and Jennifer Fumiko-Cahill, arts and features editor at the North Coast Journal. Welcome, guys.
How you doing?
Hi, Dave.
Pretty good. You know, this between Thanksgiving and Christmas season is always such a blur, where everybody stays so busy, so much happening in the news, so much planning, and hopefully you guys are enjoying this holiday season. Hope things are well with you both right now this week.
A blur describes it well.
Yeah.
Okay. Right on. Speaking of blur, let's just dive right in, Thad. And why don't you tell us what's on the cover of this week's North Coast Journal?
Yeah, this week we have a very long and very sad cover story that I wrote about the experience of Heather Muller, who is probably most folks don't know her, but she has been kind of the guiding voice in Humboldt County's messaging for its Joint Information Center and its official pandemic response. And so she has not been a traditional spokesperson as far as kind of being out and doing press conferences and interviews and stuff, but she has kind of guided the messaging as the head public information officer for the effort. And her mother, who does not live in Humboldt County, lives in another Northern California county, caught COVID and passed away late last month. And so the story kind of came about actually in that I should say I've known Heather for kind of the better part of 2 decades now, since way back when she was a reporter at the Eureka Reporter, and I was at the Times Standard, and we were covering the same things and stuff like that. So I first kind of got to know her as a rival reporter, and then she's been in her post with the Department of Health and Human Services for more than a decade now, which then when they initiated their pandemic response, kind of she took on this role associated with that. But so we've had, kind of a very, very pleasant and I think respectful professional relationship for a long time. And so at some point in late October, the county, the Joint Information Center issued some press release about COVID here in Humboldt County. And I had a question that I was just looking for clarification on. So I texted her about it, and she basically responded saying, "I don't know. I'm not in the office. My mom's in the hospital with COVID." And I was just, kind of taken aback and, registered my sympathies and then kind of checked in with her over the ensuing week. And about 9 days after she was hospitalized, Heather's mom passed away. And in the course of just kind of talking to her in the aftermath of this, she shared that her mom had a really significant hearing impairment. And so the primary way that they communicate and communicated throughout the pandemic was via email. And so I was just kind of talking, not for a story or anything, but just talking with Heather about this and kind of her experience of going back and looking through the, kind of their pandemic correspondences. And she just shared with me that she felt like there was a story there, and that there was something that really resonated with her about, some things she'd missed in their conversations, and then some things she felt like really tied in with, our larger societal conversations about COVID and vaccination and all these things that have become so charged. And so in the course of talking to her about all this, she kind of decided that she felt like there was a story worth telling there, and that she was kind of willing to share it and willing to put herself and her family in this really intimate and horrible experience she'd had out there in print, with the hopes that it would kind of change the way we all treat each other and talk to each other about COVID and these really hot button issues.
I mean, there's so much there. So thank you for the relationship you have with her and getting to where you are, that you were able to publish that this week. Mm-hmm. I think one thing that's poignant is that there's a reference that she talks about her and her colleagues in that office, public health office, or the response office, that they called it a good story, meaning that it was a good opportunity for people to look at the situation, and despite it being heartbreaking and somewhat tragic, there's a lesson there. It can advance the dialogue. It can advance how we understand and how we communicate with each other. Can you and the way that you presented it is that I'll let you tell how you did it, but there's some conversation between you and Heather, and then other times you just let the messages speak for themselves. Can you tell us a little bit about how you decided to frame the article that way?
Yeah. So first, kind of your point about her and her colleagues looking to tell kind of quote unquote good COVID stories, and she, I think, in the story says by what we mean by that is awful COVID stories. I mean, COVID stories of how COVID has impacted local residents' lives and their families' lives. And so this is a conversation that Heather and I have had ongoing since the beginning of the pandemic, because we at the Journal have really wanted to tell those same stories, and we felt like it was really important for local residents, for our readership to hear directly firsthand accounts of the impacts of this disease on people and on their families. And she's repeatedly registered to us, and then she has a quote in the story about this same kind of thing, that that's been their goal too, and it's been really hard to find people who are willing to open up about their experiences, both because they're so painful and they're also associated with shame or guilt or these other feelings of that, perhaps they're worried that their actions or the things that expose them to the virus will lead to judgment and kind of it's a really complicated web of feelings. And so there's definitely an irony in the story that Heather is the one who ends up having and sharing this really impactful COVID story. But we also, I really wanted to make it about more than that irony. Either the irony of the kind of the person who is in charge of, messaging for Humboldt County's vaccination effort, having been unable to convince her mom to get vaccinated. Her mom, was exposed to the virus when she was unvaccinated and died unvaccinated. And also wanted to get past kind of the irony of her being the one to have this good quote unquote good COVID story. And what Heather really felt strongly is that, looking back at these emails, is that while her and her mother were in close contact and they were both kind of living through the shared experience of COVID, they were often just talking past each other and they weren't really listening to each other. And so while Heather was talking to her mom about risk factors, she was 84 years old at the time the pandemic started and had congestive heart failure and some other underlying health issues that put her at very much at increased risk for the virus. Her mother was talking about being lonely and feeling isolated, and Heather talked to me about that in public health, there's all these determinants of health, and physical health is just one of them. But mental health and relationships and economic stability and all of these other things tie in. And she, looking back at these emails, really felt like she had just kind of myopically focused on physical health and the threat that COVID posed to her mom's physical health, and had failed to really address these other things with her. And I think has, some regret that she didn't talk to her mom, for instance, about how vaccination could have been a tool to help alleviate her loneliness and kind of tie all these things together. And so I felt very strongly that these emails in and of themselves were just really powerful. This body of, 20 plus months of these two people corresponding, these two very close and intimate people corresponding about everything going on in their daily lives and the way they connected and the way they kind of missed what each other were saying at various points. And so in putting together the story, I very much wanted it to be the emails to be the central part that kind of carries the reader through this chronological experience. But then I thought it was really important also to have Heather's kind of retrospective insight and reflections on this conversation. And so I tried to make the story read a little bit like a conversation, both, between them in the past and in this window of time, and then between Heather and I about what it all means, and her trying to kind of make sense of it and what she learned from it ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in there, and of course, people really need to check it out for themselves, I guess, to get the full impact and effect. But so, I mean, not to put you on the spot, but what do you think will be, the impact or effect that people might, listeners out there or readers who pick this up or find it online, Do you think that there's like a opportunity? One of the things I've been telling friends and colleagues is that there's no persuasion without engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And if you watch the documentary Social Dilemma, it talks about how just generally our society is trending towards detachment and disengagement from each other, from people that don't share the same thoughts or beliefs that we do. But family is the mechanism, in theory at least, whatever we call our family, however you define that, that's a mechanism for that, some degree of anchor here for people to actually have somebody they can talk to about important things like this. So what do you think might, how the impact might be of people seeing, this snapshot of someone else's tragedy?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think my hope, anyway, is that it'll be layered. One is, while I think most of us, have read a lot about the virus at this point, have read some firsthand accounts, some really heart-wrenching firsthand accounts of what it's like to lose a loved one of COVID. I do think it resonates a little bit differently when it's somebody from our community. And this is the first. We've had other accounts of COVID deaths and of COVID illnesses, but I feel like this is the first one that really puts the reader in the shoes of a family member whose loved one is going through this. And so, there's just some really heart-wrenching moments of Heather talking about hearing updates on her mom's health from a nurse and being hundreds of miles away. And she has this one of, where the nurse relayed just that her mom was in a tremendous amount of pain in her last days and was just, kind of lying in her hospital bed crying. And Heather, this was actually an update that was relayed to Heather from her brother. And she says, she wasn't even there. But she wasn't even in the room with her mother. And she also wasn't even a part of this actual conversation with the nurse. But it's just this image that she can't shake of her mother, 85 years old, deaf, dying in pain and crying in a hospital bed alone. And I think imagery like that really drives home just how severe this illness is. So I want that to be a core takeaway from folks. But then, I think much more than that is I think Heather has a lot of insight, and the piece has a lot of threads that run through it about the need for us to have empathy for one another, to show each other grace, and to really have these conversations honestly, and to hear each other. And so. Just because somebody is vaccine hesitant doesn't mean that they are a lost cause or that they can't be talked to about COVID and about preventative measures and about all these other ways to stay healthy and to keep the community around them healthy. And I think that's something that in many ways has been missing from a lot of the local, state, and national dialogues about COVID is both the empathy thread and then also kind of a harm reduction approach, and I think that public health in so many ways has adopted harm reduction when it comes to addiction, substance use disorders, and so many illnesses and that afflict our society. And it seems like with COVID, so much of that has gone by the wayside. And so, here we are entering the holiday season. Lots of people are going to feel the urge to gather. Many of them are vaccinated. Some of them are surely not. And so I think it's appropriate maybe for us to have those conversations about what that means. And if if you've decided that the vaccine isn't something you're going to do, what that means for other decisions you make around the holiday season and how to be as safe as possible within the confines of what you're comfortable with. So I think all those things are big takeaways. But I think the biggest core one is just that we are all going through this, really unprecedented experience together, and we're all experiencing it in different ways. We all have different fears. We all have different needs. And especially with those closest to us, it's just really incumbent upon us to treat each other with grace and understanding and really listen to each other and really have conversations to understand where we're coming from.
Thank you for the thoughtful kind of analysis, but more importantly, the thoughtful story that you're sharing with our community. I do recommend highly that people check it out. So thank you again.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I really hope folks do, and I just really want to add, I guess I'm really grateful for Heather and that she was willing to put so much of herself into this piece and really open up the window to her experience, which as somebody who is grieved the loss of my parents, it's not easy to do at any time, much less in the immediate days and weeks after your loved one has passed. So I just think it took a lot of courage on her part, and I'm really grateful for it.
Well, right on. Shout out to Heather out there. Thank you, Heather. How about you, Jen? What is going on the Arts and Features beat this week?
We had Arts Alive last week. I don't know if you noticed, if it escaped people's attention. We are, of course, not out of the woods with COVID, but people are making an effort to take part in Arts Alive, and Arts Arcada and is coming up this weekend. People are masking, trying to stick with their groups, etc., and still trying to go out and enjoy our local art, enjoy our community, and in some cases support local art. Remember that the only way to support local artists is to buy their art, to pay money for their art. It's wonderful to share images. It's great to hit them up on the gram, but you're going to want to put down some money if you've got it. Interestingly, this week we have an Art Beat story from L.L. Kessner, and she is writing about a very cool show that is ongoing. It opened during Arts Alive, but people should know this. You can see art all the time. Arts Alive is actually like a tough time to go see art, particularly like, for example, this show at the Epitome Gallery, which is the card show, is 270. That's almost a zillion. Little cards, playing cards that have been altered, cut up, collaged, oil painted, people who've made them from scratch, whatever. But it's all regarding playing cards. And they're all in these little frames along this wall, very close together. It's tough to see sometimes the art when there's a big crowd of people coming along and, people are chatting in front of the piece you really want to see. Go see art throughout the month. But the Epitome Gallery, which is a relatively new gallery here in Old Town, is having a show which has been going on for a few years. There's an annual The Card Show, which has been at different venues, and it's been all of these artists with their takes on cards. And the list of participating artists was so long, we only actually included a partial list. But some of them came out of a local arts collective, a community called Empire Squared. And some of those folks are participating this year. It's really a very cool thing because also, as well as, being able to go in and see the art, you can buy it for the low price of $30. Nice. You can get a beautiful original piece of art. And some of these artists are kind of big names locally. And, names you're going to know, people whose work you've admired in the past, and you could get it for $30. And out of that $30, Epitome Gallery is only taking 10, which sends $20 directly to the artists. That is not a deal you get very often, showing your work in a gallery. It's just true. Even I think if you sell things online, like online galleries, I don't think they even cut you that deal. So it's pretty much like buying it from the artist, except the artist doesn't have to pay rent for a space. It's fantastic. So, and who doesn't have, when you buy somebody a giant painting of yourself, it's hard for them to place it, but anybody can enjoy that. Buy one for yourself, for somebody else. It's not a big imposition. So it's pretty cool. Some of the work that LL is writing about this week includes, there's a cool picture of Gina Tuzzi's piece, which has a playing card that has been cut up and collaged, and there's watercolor painting, and there's the addition of a photograph of this Austrian fashion designer, Emile Louise Floge. I'm not sure how to say Floge. There's an umlaut. Help me. Anyway, you probably recognize her face, if not her name, from the very famous portraits by Gustav Klimt, who was her partner. But anyway, she's, created these scenes with different, icons of, female icons of art history, and it's really interesting. And there's also a photo of Forrest Stearns, who's one of the original Empire Squared artists. He shared with us a photo of the table where he and another artist were collaborating and making all of these cards. and there's just pencils everywhere. There's a couple of beers. There's all these cards kind of scattered around, and he describes the experience of getting together with a very old friend and just sitting down with a couple of beers and making art and talking and laughing all night. And that just sounds like the best thing in the world. And if only I did art.
Right.
But it's just very cool. And to be able to see the process is neat too. You know, so often we look at this work, and unless you go to, you know, open studios or something, it's kind of mysterious to us where it comes from. But anyway, it's a really cool show, and I hope you get a chance to go see it. Oh, and then the other thing is tacos. Of course, right? Tacos. You weren't getting out of here without talking to me about food.
Food.
So I went over the past few months. There have been a couple of places that have opened, both of them with mariachi bands, which I love anyway. So the story that in this week's On the Table is titled Open with Mariachi, and it is about two places, Taqueria Tecomán, which is at Humboldt Hill, and the other one is Locha's Mexican Restaurant, which is in Fortuna in the former sushi boat buffet, like the sushi and Chinese restaurant. And both are great. And the place is kind of interesting too. In both cases, there's a really great mural up at the Tecomán location, and it's worth seeing for that alone. And you should also try their molitas, which is like a less cheesy kind of a quesadilla on a homemade flour tortilla with beans and meat and salsa in it, and it's just wonderfully light, and you really get to enjoy the taste of the meat for one thing. And the meat to try there, I would suggest the al pastor, which is cooked on a trompo, which is one of those big vertical spits, which is something that I would like installed next to my couch. But that's where the pastor is cooked, with the big pineapple hunk on top and all the spices and juices running down. At the former sushi boat over at Locha's in Fortuna, the sushi boat thing is still there. And I asked one of the owners, Ana Cortez, whose mother was nicknamed Locha and whose recipes are featured at the restaurant. I was like, what are you guys going to do with that? Because they've taken the Chinese rock fountain out front and put little Mexican figurines all over it, and it's the cutest thing I've ever seen. But she was like, well, you know, we're not going to do anything right now, but maybe in the future we'll have, like, you know, little flans coming down on a. I would definitely go. That's
sign me up for the flan boats.
Willy Wonka style.
Just keep the flan coming to me.
Jack Black would approve.
Yeah, but Anna and her 7 siblings, take a moment to digest that, not only grew up together, learned to cook together, and she says of her mother taught them to be united. I don't know how you do that. I have 2 kids. I'm struggling. But they all still want to be in business together. Who knew? And they are cooking up some of Locha's favorite things, including a multi-day mole, a dish called picadas, which is very nice for breakfast, which is like a soft masa, like a little circle of soft masa with salsa and then queso fresco on top of it, and it's delightful. It is delightful in the evening. It is delightful for breakfast. And they have birria and barbacoa, goat on the weekends. So, yes, I know that's everybody's question nowadays is there birria? Yes, there is.
Where do I get my goat?
But if you go on the weekday, you can still get the quesabirria, which is like kind of a small quesadilla, birria, folded, fried delight. And that has a beef birria, which is also very nice and juicy and tasty. I strongly recommend it. But it's really nice to see new places opening up with such a celebratory vibe. And yeah, it's good food and just like good, happy energy that I feel like we need, and in the form of tacos.
Yeah, it all sounds delicious, close by and approachable. So this is all great. Before we go, thank you for the telling us about the cards at Epitome and about these new taco places in our community. You want to put in a really quick plug for drama?
Yes. Oh, well, very briefly, check it out. Colin Yo is reviewing both a new single from a local band and the local production of Waiting for Godot. So fantastic.
And we might have to pick that up in the future if you don't get it elsewhere. Well, that's about it for our time this week. Jennifer and Thad, thank you both so much. We really appreciate you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
North Coast Journal is available on newsstands now. Pick one up. Also available all 24/7, anytime online. Stay informed, stay safe, and take care until next week. Bye, guys.